Hey, fourth grade. So we are going to continue reading Lucas's story, I Survived the Attacks of September 11th by Lauren Tarshis. We've been talking about Lucas and his struggle with having to quit football and going into New York City, sneaking into New York City to visit with Uncle Benny, who works at the fire department with his dad. And it just so happens that on this day, a Tuesday, when he snuck into New York to visit with Uncle Benny and talk to Uncle Benny about his problem with concussions and football and what the doctor said. That's the morning that the Twin Towers in New York were attacked. And so the last chapters that we read, we see the first tower being struck. We see the firefighters that work with Dad and Uncle Benny. We see their response to it. And then we also see the reporters' response to it, the television reports of what was going on. We see the men and women that were in the streets. We see their response to the towers being attacked, which brings us to chapter 8 rather. Chapter 8 starts off at 9 a.m. So the first tower was struck at 8:46. So we're about 15 minutes from the first tower being struck. That's where we're going to begin our reading today. So if you want to go ahead in the reading classroom and open the book, remember that is under the week of September 20th through 24th. On my screen, you can see it here. It says online book. Click to open that with Cami. Chapter 8 of the book begins on page 26 of the PDF. And while you're opening items from the classroom, in addition to the book, you can open the assignment right here that says Thursday questions, chapters 8 through 9. Go ahead and click to open that with Cami so that on one tab we have our questions, and on the other tab you have the book, and you can follow along and read with me as I read it out loud, and we'll kind of talk about the questions as we go through them. So I'll give you just a moment to get yourself ready. Remember, at any time, if you need more time to type an answer in or more time to open something, just pause the video, get yourself ready, and then when you're ready, click play, and we'll keep going. Okay, do you have everything ready? Here we go. So we are going to be reading chapters 8 and 9. And if you are on the PDF, you are on page 26. And the vocabulary word that we are going to be looking for in these two chapters is the word tattered. Remember that in Google Classroom, under this week's assignments, you do have a Look It activity that goes over the vocabulary words and definitions, as well as synonyms and antonyms that go along with them. So if you have not taken time to play that and review those words, you do have time this week still to do that. And now we're going to start reading. Chapter 8, 9 a.m. Dad once told Lucas that what he liked most about fighting fires was that everyone had a job to do. If you don't work together, you don't put out the fire. And the way Dad explains this to Lucas, it kind of makes me think that maybe that's another reason Lucas likes being on a football team. Because if you think about a football team, the team has to work together in order to win games, right? If the quarterback doesn't work with his coach and doesn't work with his offensive line and his defensive line, and they don't all work together as a team, they're not going to be very good. They could be, I don't know, maybe like the Lions were when the Packers beat them this week, right? So maybe that's one reason that Lucas likes being on the football team. He likes that team mentality, kind of like Dad likes the team mentality of a firefighter. So now Lucas looked around the firehouse. He needed a job, he realized, something he could do to help. So he went into the kitchen. The table was covered with plates of half-eaten bacon and eggs. The sink was overflowing with dirty pots. So what job can Lucas do while the firefighters are away? You're exactly right. He got to work, clearing the dishes and glasses from the table. Every few minutes, the alarm box squawked, and the dispatcher came on with a new alarm. And you'll notice that again, we see here they're using italics. And in this case, they're using italics to show us what the dispatcher is saying. So Lucas is hearing the dispatcher make these comments, but the dispatcher isn't actually right there with Lucas. So the dispatcher says, all units meet at Vesey and West Streets. Now remember that, okay? Vesey and West Streets. We'll need to know that in chapter 9. The TV was on the counter, the sound turned down. The picture on the screen showed the burning tower. Lucas reached out and turned the volume up so that he could hear it over the voice of the dispatcher. If you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, the TV man's voice said, you are looking at an extraordinary sight. Just a few minutes ago, a plane crashed into Tower 1 at New York's famed World Trade Center. We have no official information about what kind of plane it was, but witnesses report it was a commercial jet. I know we've talked in class about how I remember exactly what I was doing, and some of you guys have gone home and talked with Mom, Dad, and Uncle Susie about what they were doing, and some of them have told you, and you guys have talked with me about it in class, of them listening to the news. I remember the news talking about this and talking about trying to figure out what it was that happened and what it was that had hit the towers and who was behind it. There were a lot of different reports coming in at the time. Lucas picked up Georgie's huge cast iron skillet and started scrubbing. Do you think he's a little anxious and nervous at this point? Yeah, I can imagine he is. Do you think that he is scrubbing that iron skillet rigorously to get out some of his nerves? Have you ever done something like that where you're nervous or anxious about something, so you really focus intensely on what you're working on? Kind of helps to keep busy, right? Which is, I guess, why Lucas decided to clean the kitchen. So the man on the TV continues, and he's going to give us some facts. And this is right here, number 3. The towers were built in 1970, the man continued, at 110 floors each, so definitely high rises. They were once the tallest buildings in the world. There are hundreds of firefighters on the scene. We have reports that firefighters have been entering the building and heading up the stairs to reach people who might need assistance. It's an amazing sight. Remember, we talked about how these rescue workers are examples of heroes. To imagine them running inside these buildings that are on fire and have been attacked, it's kind of hard to imagine being brave enough to do something like that. And that's what Lucas is seeing right now. And this is what the world was seeing when we were watching it on the news when it happened. These people bravely going in to try to help. And we see the author here use some more sensory language to help us really see what's going on. He says, the smoke was thicker now, painting the blue sky a dirty brown. So it's no longer a beautiful, bright blue, pretty sky. There were white dots floating in the smoke, almost like confetti. What do you think white dots floating in the smoke could be? Think about a building has just been struck, and the windows and the walls are on fire, and debris, which is a vocabulary word, we've talked about debris, is kind of floating. Lucas realizes it's paper. Millions of pieces of paper swept out through the hole in the building. The man kept talking about the towers that they took 4 years to build, and that they could withstand winds of 140 miles per hour, and that 50,000 people worked there. His voice was calm, almost like a teacher giving a history lesson. So the TV reporter, despite this event that was unimaginable happening, was reporting in a way that was calm. Now, can you imagine? Just like the firefighters running into the buildings, they did it. They probably were scared, nervous, anxious, but they did it anyways. Do you think the reporter is calm right now, or do you think he is acting calm in order to continue to do his job? Yeah, probably acting calm. Lucas was reaching up to hang the heavy skillet on a hook over the sink. Suddenly, the man on the TV gasped. "Oh my God, what was that? Another explosion! Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like a second plane. Yes, another jet. It has just crashed into the second tower." At this point, the TV reporter no longer is calm. He's kind of lost his mask a little bit. It's dropped, and you see the emotion of the reporter explaining exactly what he sees. So while Lucas is watching on the TV, he sees this second tower get hit. The heavy skillet slipped out of Lucas's hand and into the sink, shattering plates and glasses. Lucas barely noticed. His eyes did not move from the TV screen. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said again, his voice shaking. So at this point, the TV reporter, the news reporter, is no longer calm. That his acting has kind of gone away with the surprise and fear of what he just witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to replay the video of what we just saw." The screen flipped. It showed the North Tower burning. That was the first tower that was struck. And then suddenly, on the left side of the screen, another plane appeared. Just like the first, it was a big jet. And quick as a blink, it slammed into the other tower. That'd be the second tower, exploding into a fireball. Fire erupted out of all sides of the building, a ring of flaming blackness. Now there were 2 clouds of churning black smoke. Lucas's heart pounded. It was hard to breathe. There were more people talking on the TV now, not just the man. "Oh my, oh my, that looked," one woman said. "What did we just see?" said another. And that's exactly the type of chaos that was going on nationwide when the towers were struck. The first tower was struck, and that's when the TV reporters and news agencies came out and started broadcasting about what was going on. By the time the second tower was struck, news channels and reporters and everybody were already out filming. And so nationwide witnessed it happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said, "we have just witnessed the horrific sight of a second plane hitting the other tower, the South Tower. There was a massive explosion." "There must be a computer problem, a complete failure of the air traffic control system," said the first woman. And if you can imagine not knowing what is going on and seeing these 2 landmark buildings in New York City being struck by planes, trying to figure out what in the world is causing it. Why would this be happening? What has happened? And their first response is, it must be a computer problem. Someone has mixed up directions for these planes. What the man said next made Lucas's entire body start to shake, or vocabulary word here could be tremble. "That did not look like an accident," he said. "It looks like that plane flew into that tower on purpose. I think this is some kind of attack." And That's the realization that went through every American nationwide at this point, is the realization that it wasn't an accident, that someone was doing this on purpose. And that's what the reporter was sharing, and Lucas was realizing at the same time that millions of Americans were realizing the same thing. And this brings us to chapter 9. Lucas tried calling Mom again. And remember, when he tried calling Mom the first time, he wasn't able to get a hold of her. And we said it was probably something to do with so many people trying to make phone calls at the same time. Remember, how many people did it say worked in the towers? 50,000 people. All of them were going to be trying to reach out for help. The people in the streets were going to be calling. People that were at home and finding out about what was going on, they were going to be doing just like Lucas and trying to reach their loved ones to see if they were okay. And so the telephones couldn't keep up with all of the people that were trying to make calls. Well, Lucas tries calling Mom again, and now when he called, he got a fast, busy signal and a recording. All circuits are busy. He tried Dad's phone. Same thing. He dialed over and over. Mom, then Dad. Mom, then Dad. He just kept getting the busy signal. The department radio crackled. Recall, recall, the dispatcher said. All personnel, on duty and off. What that means is if you are scheduled to be working, they're calling you to come. If you are scheduled to be off, they're calling you to come. It's reached such a point that they need every available set of hands to come into this area where the planes have crashed and help. I repeat, this is a recall of all emergency personnel. There were 11,000 firefighters in the department, and they needed every single one. 11,000 firefighters. And they called them all to come and start helping. Before Lucas knew what he was doing, he had run out into the street. He couldn't be alone, watching the world fall apart on TV. In fact, he wasn't. He needed to find Dad and Uncle Benny and the rest of the men, his firehouse family. He wanted to be with them. He knew he wasn't thinking clearly. He didn't even know if he'd be able to get close to where they were, if it was even safe to try. But he went anyway. Some kind of attack. Some kind of attack. Was that man on TV right? What did that even mean? Who was attacking? Did he mean that those planes had hit the towers on purpose? The thought hadn't even come into Lucas's mind when he saw the first plane hit. But thinking about it now, of course, that was the only thing that made sense. The day was so perfectly clear. There was no way that two airplanes could have hit the towers unless they had been aiming right for them. But who could be insane enough, evil enough, to fly planes into buildings? Lucas wiped away the tears running down his face. He wove through the crowds of people on the sidewalk. Some were running north, but most seemed like they were in shock, standing there dazed, staring at the fires above them. So if you think back to one of our vocabulary words we had, frozen in shock, not moving, mesmerized. Lucas has just described the people outside, and they fit that description. What vocabulary word could we use? Yeah, hypnotized. You could say they were hypnotized or mesmerized. They were in fear, shocked with fear of unknowing of what was going on, and they were just kind of frozen in place. The only thing not frozen was the noise. And in this next paragraph, we have some really vivid words to describe hearing. If it's describing our sense of hearing, what do we call them again? Yeah, sensory words. So listen to the sensory words that the author uses to describe the sound on the street. The only noise was sirens, hundreds of them, honking and screaming, wailing and shrieking and blaring. The sound all crashed together into one terrible song. It's very vivid, isn't it? I can imagine all of that sound. You know, when there's a lot of sound that it just becomes one big noise. That's what Lucas is experiencing. A crowd of people huddled around something in the middle of the street. Lucas slowed down and looked. It was a big tire attached to a tangle of metal. It didn't look like the tire of a car or a truck. "What is that?" a woman said. "It's part of a plane," said a man. "It's landing gear." So this is a piece off of the plane that crashed. Lucas looked away. He pushed through the crowd heading south, Vesey and West Streets. That's what the dispatcher had said. All personnel go to Vesey and West Streets, right? So who do you think is going to be there? That's where the staging area was. That's where they were telling them to go. All firefighters. Where the firefighters were gathering. If Dad had made it here from Randall's Island, that's where Lucas would find him. That's Lucas's thinking. That's where Dad's going to be. That's where he needed to go. He would look for the Seagrave. Remember the truck that Dad was on? He would wait for Dad there. Lucas inched through the crowd. Most people were standing still, watching, but now there were more people coming from the direction of the towers, so coming from where the planes had crashed. Some of them were soaked in sweat and their clothes tattered, which is a vocabulary word. So imagine someone that was in the building when it was hit, being in a fire, trying to get out and escaping. What's happening to their clothes to make them tattered? Yeah, they've been ripped. They've been torn. They might be burnt some. It was the looks on their faces, though, stunned and horrified, that told Lucas where they had come from. So the way they looked on their faces, yeah, their clothes were tattered, but when he looked in their face, he could tell they had been inside the buildings. There were dozens and dozens of them. Remember, 50,000 people worked in these buildings. Others walking alone, some holding cans. Some of the women were barefoot. He imagined their high-heeled shoes kicked into the corners of stairwells. Nobody was carrying a purse or a briefcase. And Lucas understood why. He had heard many stories about people who had survived fires and explosions and collapses, like what is happening right now. So many times they had escaped with not a second to spare. If they had stopped for anything at all to grab a purse or even tie a shoe, they wouldn't have made it. So they left all of their stuff behind. They didn't even think about their stuff, because if they would have stopped to think about their stuff, quite possibly wouldn't have made it out. A policeman up ahead was trying to stop people from moving south. "Everyone, please leave this area," he shouted. "It's not safe. Please leave this area and head north." But Lucas kept walking, and nobody tried to stop him. He felt invisible. Just an 11-year-old boy walking in the middle of this chaos. Ladder 177 had to be one of the first units to get to the tower. That meant they'd be the closest. Lucas was still 3 blocks away when he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Hey," a young policeman said. "Where are you going?" Where are you going? Are you lost?" "I need to find..." And before he could get the words out, he heard someone calling his name. "Lucas!" His dad rose up over all the sirens. "Dad!" And there was his dad pushing through the crowd. He grabbed Lucas and held him tight. For a few seconds, Lucas couldn't hear the sirens. All he could hear was the beating of Dad's heart. So how is Lucas feeling right now? Can you imagine? Through all of the chaos and the firefighters and not knowing if he was going to find Dad and Uncle Benny, he's now found Dad. And all of the other noise goes away, and he hears one thing: Dad's beating heart. Do you think he's feeling relief right now? I imagine he's feeling very relieved. He hasn't found Uncle Benny yet. He hasn't been able to reach Mom yet, but he has Dad. He's in Dad's arms. So right now, all is okay. That brings us to the end of chapter 9, which means we have 3 chapters left to find out how Lucas's story is going to finish. That will be our next video that we will be reading next week. I will talk with you guys later. Bye.